Hey everyone, Brayden Brookshier here, and whether you are new to Greek exegesis and exploring syntactical categories and how that informs our interpretation, reading, and even theology, or you're just trying to refresh these categories and discussions in Greek grammar and syntax, I hope these videos are helpful and simple enough to help provide additional resources. Now today we are looking at the nominative, but more specifically, the predicate nominative. And then we're going to learn how to distinguish between which one is the nominative or the subject and which one is the predicate nominative with some case study examples and a helpful memory tool. Real quick though, let's just do a quick recap of the nominative because this is important. We need to have this drilled in our brain if it's not already. The nominative case is the inflected noun functioning as the subject of the finite verb in a clause or in a sentence. It's the person or thing that's doing or receiving the action of the verb. And as I talk with some of my students about this is the actor of the verb, the actor, or it's the one being acted upon. So it's in some way doing or receiving the action of the verb. And the exception to this, it simply would be if the subject is embedded within the verb. Since verbs do have person involved in them, in Greek you don't need a nominative case or a subject that is outside the verb. You don't need a noun to have it. It could be embedded within the verb. You already know that, but helpful reminder. Now also, the nominative case has 7 primary functions or uses, and this is where syntactical categories come in. Now, we're going to be focusing on the predicate nominative, but just be aware how a nominative case can be, well, its most basic use is the subject. It's when the nominative case is the subject of a finite verb. It's what it's known for. It's what you learn in basic Greek grammar, but we're to be aware of the other possibilities of how the nominative case can be functioning in a clause or in a sentence. We're going to be looking at the predicate nominative, but be aware it can also be functioning in apposition, address, appellation, absolute, and hanging nominative. Now, the predicate nominative predicates, states, affirms, or asserts something about the subject. And to say it another way, it provides further information about the subject by expressing a state of being. So sometimes, and actually want to come back to that in a second, but it's typically, if you skip down to the third bullet point, it's going to be involving typically the Greek verbs of eimi, huparko, or ginomai. In English, that would be the type of verbs like am, are, is, was, were, and will be. It's those type of verbs because this is going to show you a linking verb, the connection between the two. Now, an example in English, when we say he is a teacher, he is the subject and teacher is the predicate nominative. It's predicating, asserting, stating, affirming, or asserting something about the subject. So predicate nominative is a noun that the subject is linked to by a linking verb. Predicate nominative will only occur in a clause or sentence that contains more than one noun in the nominative case. And I guess the only exception there would be if for some reason the subject is already embedded within the verb, which we will have an example of. Now, quick thing, going back up to here in this section, if the predicate nominative is providing further information about the subject, it's going to be doing one of two things typically. It will either be, virtually equivalent or therefore convertible. And to say it this way, the subject and the predicate nominative are equal. You can flip it one way or the other. A good example of this is when we say Jesus is the Son of Man. Because when you flip that, the Son of Man is Jesus, it makes sense. It is still true. So the subject and the predicate nominative are convertible in that case. That's sometimes, I would say that's more rare. More commonly, however, you're going to have the predicate nominative introducing a larger category or class of which the subject is a subset. Good simple example, when we say the thing, John is a man, you can't say a man is John because a man is not always John. John is a man. There's that larger class or category in which he is participating or part of ontologically and so on. And so that's a helpful difference of how you're going to help understand predicate nominative if it's going to be either operating somehow virtually equivalent to the subject, therefore convertible, or if it's going to be operating as a subset of a larger class or category. But now, of course, if the predicate nominative is also a nominative case noun, but is predicating, stating, affirming, or asserting something about the subject, in our Greek exegesis, we need to be able to distinguish between the subject and the predicate nominative. So how do we do that? That's really the question at hand. And distinguishing between them has been really, the good news is it's not that difficult to do so. In fact, there's a helpful memory tool known as P.A.P, P-A-P. And we'll get to the pecking order of that in a second too, but that's why I'm going to encourage you to memorize it in this way too. P.A.P. First, the order of precedence to memorize this. The first P would be the subject will be the pronoun, whether stated or implied in the verb. Secondly, the subject will be articular. It will have the article. And number three, the second P, but the third letter, the subject will be a proper name. So now as for a pecking order of this is very important. Pronouns are given priority even when there's an articular noun in the clause. Pronouns will always have priority as far as being the subject of a clause or sentence. But now if there's an articular noun and a proper name appear in the same clause, word order will be a determinative, or maybe a determinative factor in identifying the subject and the predicate nominative. And so if you had to put a pecking order, pronouns are given greatest precedence and priority, and then kind of tied for second would be articular nouns and proper names, in which word order will be helpful. Now, there's no better way of looking at how to distinguish than looking at examples in the Greek text. So what we're going to do here is, as you can see, in the yellow will be the nominative, or in this case, the subject. So the head nominative, the subject, and then a lightish blue will be predicate nominative. Looking at Colossians 1:18 first, and if I were to translate this basically in English, it would say something to the effect of, and he is the head. And now, you're like, wait a second, but hey, kaphale has the article, so wouldn't that get precedence? Well, no. If we refer to P.A.P, we know that pronouns always get precedence. And so autos is the subject of the verb. And so it's the actor of the verb here. He is the head. We wouldn't say it this way as the head is he. Now, you can make a case and say, well, hey, is this convertible or is this a subset? You can wrestle with examples of that. There's usually pretty clear distinctions whether this is a convertible predicate nominative or if the subject is somehow a subset of the predicate nominative and so on. But in this case, as far as interpreting or translating and understanding the syntax of the sentence, we identify the subject here in this example in Colossians 1:18 by noticing the pronoun is the subject. And of course, for continuity, let's just do two more examples with the pronoun. In the second example from Luke 3:22, we see how the personal pronoun is the subject. So not just to differentiate, autos is a pronoun, but so is Sue. Sue is a personal pronoun. It means you. And this comes in the part of the narrative of Luke's gospel when the Father is speaking directly to Jesus at his baptism. It says, "You are my beloved son." So again, even though hahuyas and ha-agapetas have the article, well, they're the predicate. It's predicating something about, well, you, in this case, Jesus. Acts 2:15, just to give one more. The verb is fronted here, and then what is interesting also is you may think that hora trite would be the subject. I mean, it is the nominative case, and there's no other nominatives in this little clause that would be rivaling it. So wait a second, why not just make that the subject of the sentence? Well, one, because it just wouldn't make as much sense. But two, it's not completely uncommon to have the subject embedded in the verb. And so here we would have put it as the implied subject. And that's why when we read this, for it is the third hour of the day. Now let's look also at articular nouns. Remember, if we're going through P.A.P, first you have the pronouns that get greatest precedence. Second, there would be articular nouns and proper names. So articular nouns will help us distinguish too. If you look at 1 John 4:8, very famous verse, and it says something to the effect of, because God is love. Now, the subject is articular. It makes it a great example of just something you would expect. If you have two nominative case nouns, whichever one has the article, in this case, since there's not pronouns, you go down the list. Okay, are either of them a pronoun? No. Well, okay, we have two nouns. One has the article. That settles it. It's simple enough. It's also a great example of subset proposition when we're talking about subsets. Well, is this convertible? No, it's not convertible. You say God is love, but you can't say love is God. So that is a helpful way to go back to understanding, is this one of those convertible ways that the predicate nominative is functioning or not? Or is this an example of subset proposition? All right, second example, John 1:1. And then, of course, very famous one here. And the Word was God. And now we have theos fronted here in front of the subject. And so in these other examples, we're seeing the subject come first. So word order has been more natural to the English speaker, where we read left to right. But in this case, if we read it left to right, it wouldn't be doing justice to the Greek. It would say, and God was the Word. But that is not what the Greek says, because Greek is an inflected language. Case endings are indicating not just the case of the word, but its function in the sentence. And so halagos has the article. It is the subject. Theos is the predicate. It is stating something further about the subject. So in this case, this is really important, because this is how we get theology from grammar and syntax, and understanding the language as the veil of interpretation. And so what we're seeing here is that the logos belongs to that class, that category, that subset of deity. And so very helpful. One more example here too. This one's very simple, and also from John chapter 1, John 1:14. And the word became flesh. Again, the subject is articular. Now let's look at one example of proper name. This one is pretty basic as far as understanding this rule. So we have P.A.P. So we have the pronoun gets greatest precedence. Then you have articular nouns, and then proper names kind of in second place with each other. And now I like this example too, not only because it has a proper name in it, but also because you have two other articular nouns in there. And so we have to ask the question, well, what do you do? And we already addressed this, but let's put it in action. When you have an articular noun, articular two articular nouns right here with ha Christos and ha huios, but you also have a proper name, Jesus. And so what do? Well, the good thing is this is when word order does matter. Contrary to what some people will say or unintentionally imply, word order is not completely irrelevant in Greek. It does have its place. It's just that we have to remember that's an inflected language, so the subject does not have to be kind of like what we do in English, subject, verb, object. It does not have to be that way. So in this case, we're going to identify it based on Jesus being the proper name, Jesus being the proper name, because it is taking precedence as far as word order. Because it comes before the articular nouns, it makes more sense to render this as because Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And now in D.A. Carson's commentary on the Gospel of John, he brings up the discussion that you can make the case for sure that this is an example of a convertible predicate nominative. And by that, you would say that the Messiah is Jesus. You can flip it the other way. But however, as far as just talking strictly syntax and translation, we're going to want to identify Jesus as the subject. And then, of course, we're going to ask it, what kind of predicate nominative? Is this an example of some sort of subset proposition being made, or is this convertible? You can have those further discussions, but identifying the subject Jesus would be because of word order in this case. Now let's summarize everything we talked about for today. The predicate nominative provides further information about the subject, the head nominative, by expressing a state of being about it. And when trying to distinguish the nominative and the predicate nominative, refer to the memory tool P.A.P. Which means, of course, pronoun, which will get greatest precedence and will identify the subject. Second would be the articular noun, and also then the last P, proper name. Both those will be tied as far as precedence. Refer to word order when trying to distinguish. And last, and if we did not make this a great enough point, which we probably should, the predicate nominative usually follows after the subject in the word order of a clause or sentence. So when the predicate nominative precedes the subject as it does in John 1:1, which I'll go up to in a second, the predicate nominative might be fronted for emphasis. Now we can't say that as a hard and fast rule that's always fronted for emphasis, but certainly in John 1:1c. So let's look at that again as we are going to close out. And a very famous passage again right here, John 1:1c. Kai, Theos, and Halagos. And so what John and what many grammarians are noticing here is that John fronted Theos for some sort of emphasis to draw our attention to what is being predicated or stated about Halagos, about the word. That it's not just that the word was, and this is a simple thing to say that he is God or the essence of deity, whatever God is, the word is, but he's fronting it there to draw our attention to as we read the Greek text. Now, we hope this is helpful for you. Subscribe to this channel. More videos like this coming. For PDF versions of the notes, or if you have questions or suggestions for future videos or want to have a personal Greek tutor, feel free to email me directly, BraydenBrookshier@gmail.com, spelled out for you right there. Always helpful bibliography resources. Going Deeper with Greek New Testament. Going Deeper with the New Testament Greek by Merkel, Plummer, Kostenberger, and of course, the legendary volume itself, Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics by Daniel B. Wallace. Hopefully this is helpful, and now you can distinguish between the nominative, which is the subject, and the predicate nominative.